I finally took my honeymoon last week, and my wife and I spent some time staying in Airbnbs that all had saunas last week. So, with our two daughters, it was a little bit difficult to find the time to make that happen. And the grandparents came through, and so took our honeymoon after 2 years. So, it's good to be back, and we'll be doing some more episodes regularly here. And again, the purpose of the show, just for anybody watching right now, is really to feature individuals who are living out abundant leadership. And abundant leadership is what we teach here at Abundant to teams, to organizations, and to individual leaders. Leaders who've performed at really high levels, but have found that, you know what, even though they've performed really well, there's something that's missing. And there's a deeper level of connection and meaning and fulfillment that they're looking for in their work. And when they find that and create that, they end up performing at even higher levels than they thought were possible. So, it's really valuable to hear from people who are actually doing the work and who are living it out. And that's why we have Mr. Aaron Strazicich. Aaron, how do I pronounce your last name? I don't know if I've ever pronounced it right, or I have every single time. Is it Strazicich?
It's Strazicich. My Croatian brethren would not be happy on how I would pronounce that. It's technically Strazicich, but Strazicich is the Americanized version of that. But you can call me Straz.
Straz. I know. I always call you Straz. Cool. Well, it's great to have you. And why don't you just quick share a little bit about what you do, just your position, who you work for, so people have an idea, just some context for sure, what you do in the marketplace.
Yeah. So I work for a company called Paycom Software. Gosh, I've been here almost about 8 years now. Mm-hmm. And so I am a sales leader, and I lead a team of about 9 people, 9 account executives. And we sell HRIS, human capital management technology, to mid-sized businesses. So basically taking every Excel sheet, paper, manual process that one does as an employee and put it in one app. So we're trying to be the Amazon to the workforce, just like how we are automated in our consumer lives. This is what we're trying to do within the workforce.
Cool. Thanks for that little bit of context. And I'd like to start with you from there by just going back to where we met and where your relationship with Abundant began and the journey that you've taken on the last year and a half.
Yeah.
It's been quite a journey. And, I think back to, was it March of 2019?
Yeah, technically March of 2019. However, there's 6 months prior where I was introduced to Abundant through Brian. And I had a really powerful conversation that I never will ever forget. I remember one of my buddies referred me to, he's like, oh man, you got to work on your sales tactic and sales leadership.
Yeah.
And there's this awesome, company that does a weekend to help you grow as a leader.
Who was
that? Was Jay York. York. Yeah. And so I was like, and I trust Jay. I've played football with him all throughout college. He's one of my greatest friends. And I was like, yeah, I kind of will take this call. I have to do it's called an immersion for a 3-day trip. That seems aggressive. I got a wife and kid, but I ended up taking this call 6 months before March 2019. And that's where my life really started to change. It was this 15-minute call. And I was like, all right, I'll just take a call on my way to the office. And I was driving there at 6:30. Well, that turned into an hour and a half conversation. And I remember driving in circles. I've never been asked these questions before or really tapped into my heart in a long time in the way that conversation did. And I was like, there's something to this.
Yeah. And
so fast forward, 2 years, I remember that first 6 months, I'm like, what do I do in between this? The immersion's not until March. And I ended up pretty much watching Tony Robbins videos for 6 months straight. He's like, you should check out Tony Robbins. He's great. Literally started to retrain my whole mind on my car ride to the office for literally 6 months straight. It was that discipline equals freedom that became really prevalent to me, and the rest is history. in terms of what abundance done for me. And I can't wait to share more about that today.
Yeah. So you bring up something interesting, because that conversation, there was a number of interesting things you bring up. The first thing I want to reflect back to you is you said you tapped into your heart for the first time in a while. So what were you doing before that call? And of course we go through seasons, but what was the season that you were in as a high performer in not tapping into your heart? And like, what were you doing instead?
I think the question that really got me thinking and made me have this aha moment, it was like on a scale of 1 to 10, how much longer could you operate the way you're operating today as a sales leader? And I remember asking myself, I'm like, maybe 6 months. And it was like, well, what's going to happen if you continue that and you don't change? And I was like, I don't know if I can make it. And I was operating from a place of, I needed to control everything within my sales process. I needed to basically sell for my reps. I needed to take control of every interaction with customers. It was one of need, like I need to be in control. And it really eliminated, it basically crippled me to the point where I couldn't scale my office. I couldn't scale my dreams. I couldn't get to my goals that I wanted because I'm one person. I was like basically trying to be an account executive and have 8 BDR set meetings for me. And I just try to close everything down. But that's not the way to live. And so obviously
it's a way.
That's a way to live. And that's where I feel like a lot of sales leaders, when push comes to shove, it's very easy to take control yourself, and so that's where I was in that space of like control. I need to, be a part of every single process. And on the flip side of that, I really found that when I am leading from a place of just trying to get to know my people and really developing them, everything changes.
I think that's really well put. And a lot of managers experience that, especially because, you're often put into a management position because you were a high performer. And the reality is what's required to sell is a little bit different skill set. Of course, there's ways in which it translates, but it's a little bit different skill set than actually leading other individuals, right? Developing leaders versus just developing an account. So I think that's really well put. And there's a lot we could talk about there, but with having that connection to the heart, there was another breakthrough that you experienced when you came to one of our events. And I remember that time very vividly, right? That was a really special weekend. And, I'm curious to hear from you why a weekend like that's really important for people like you who are hard charging, high performing leaders, because you had been listening to Tony Robbins tapes for 6 months and that was helping you, right? And you were increasing in your performance in the way you were showing up in certain ways. And there was something else that you got from the immersion. So I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about your experience there and why you think taking that time to immerse is so valuable for leaders on their journey.
Yeah. I think I would throw it out and just basically ask the question, anybody who's watching, is when's the last time you've ever taken a vacation to invest solely in yourself? And when I was asked that question, I was like, couldn't tell you. And being on the flip side of it, it is the most important thing that I think anybody could do while they're on this earth, is to invest in yourself and to really understand some of your limiting beliefs, some of the dreams that you've been repressing for a long time, some of the things that are holding you back, and some of the things that you're really excited about in terms of opportunity. And so I think to immerse yourself and to really go all in on figuring out who you are, that's what immersion is all about.
Yeah, and I just want to pick up on this because I think it's a really important concept, and it's important now more than ever with just how crazy life is and crazy the world is. And I love to travel, right? I love to take vacations and like go see the world. Um, and that's a very different experience than taking time just to invest into yourself or rejuvenate. Now, with vacation or travel, again, I love to do that, but it's kind of like you go, you experience a new part of the world, and you can be entertained, you can be inspired in certain ways, but there has to be a lot more intention to go to that deeper level. And if not, then you kind of just come back to the same thing that there was before, right? There's life as it was before, go on vacation, come back to life as it was before. What's different about immersion, creating an immersive experience for yourself to connect to your next level of vision and the leader that you need to be to realize it, is that it's not coming back to life as it was before. It's actually preparing yourself to to change your life going back, right? To make changes, to get altitude over everything that you're doing, and to see the opportunities and the possibility for you to move forward. And that means something different for everybody. That's why I use language like move forward, because for someone like yourself, that might be how you can show up more powerfully as a leader, right? Or a relationship that's a huge opportunity for your organization or your team. But moving forward can look different for everybody, right? Sometimes it's something physical or emotional, or maybe they're not in sales and it means something different altogether. So for you, what was the biggest shift that you experienced at your immersion?
So the biggest shift, I think there's been many times in my life where when fear is like faced with me, I'll go the route of like forget everything and run.
Mm.
And I think for the first time, it taught me that I could face everything and rise.
Mm.
And one example that stood out is we were having some type of journal prompt. And it was like, what's one thing that you've been holding on to that you just really want to get off your chest and grow in? And I think one thing that really stood out to me is that I've always had a decent relationship with my dad, but it's always been, somewhat surface level. He was my coach growing up, and I wanted something deeper, more sustenance, and us to go to just a different level. And I remember sharing that in a group, and I remember the guy sitting next to me. He basically stopped me, after I was getting pretty emotional, and he's like, and we were about to break for lunch. He's like, "Hey man, whatever you do, like I'm not letting you go to lunch until you call your dad and tell him and share your heart with him." I was like, "Okay, thank you, but excuse me, I gotta go to lunch." And he's like, "No man, like F you." He's like, "I just lost my dad last year. He killed himself. And I'm not gonna let you make the same mistake that I had." And I was just like confronted with this, like, whoa, this is really gonna happen. Like, he's literally not gonna let me go, and I can't not do this. So having all these feelings, I ended up calling my dad, and I started like picking up the phone. I'm like, "Please go to voicemail. Please go to voicemail. Don't answer. Whatever happens, answer with literally within the first ring." And I started bawling. It's like, "Man, what's up?" I was just like, "I just want to be closer." He's like, "Yeah, me too." And it was just like so easy. But I think the message that so many of us have, like right now, even if you're watching, like you just think like, what's that one conversation that I've been holding on to that I'm so scared to have? And we build it up in our mind, and it becomes this story, this thing that is just like a cloud following you, just showering you at most of your weeks, months that you live. I was like, I need to get some sunshine in here, man. Like, And that was that push, that weekend. And I'm like, oh my God, when I face those fears and become vulnerable and I actually share the truth, that's when things start to happen. And that was that moment where I put my flag in the ground. It was almost like when I woke up and I was like, God damn, like I didn't realize how long I've been holding on to this. I think it was like 11 years. And when we're vulnerable, we let ourselves be seen, that's when people start to fall in love with you. And I haven't looked back since.
I remember that. It's a beautiful story. And it was also just a domino, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what I'd like to hear a little bit more about is there was that experience with your father of you leaning into more vulnerability and sharing with him.
Mm-hmm.
And where did that domino go next? Or what other dominoes did that knock over for you around vulnerability?
It was first with my team. I remember one of my reps called me out. It was like a year before I started Abundant. She called me out because I knew her growing up throughout high school. And she knew the old Aaron. I remember in a one-on-one, she's like, yeah, I just feel like sometimes you're just trying to be like too corporate. Like, I wish you would be yourself more.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, what do you mean be myself more? I am myself. Got all defensive. But now looking back, I'm like, I've been putting on a lot of armor and a lot of different masks within my job. And when I came back, I'm like, I'm just going to let myself be seen. Like, I don't care, because however I feel when I say that, it's so much less work too. When you're actually just not trying to say the perfect thing to the people that you lead, you tell them your faults. You're like, yeah, I really messed up here. Or, I don't know what to do. What do you guys think? That's when the dynamic in your team, and we talk a lot about Abundant, about psychological safety. When you can tell your ideas, you can share your heart without judgment and not creating shame. It's amazing what happens within a team. And when I started doing that, we were literally like 30th out of 50 in the country. Came back that March after losing many deals. And when I started just living from my heart, I kid you not, like we started skyrocketing. And it wasn't because of me. It was because my team felt actually safe to be who they were called to be. And so if you think about a boat and the wake that it creates, I was so much just results. Well, when I started focusing on relationship and really figuring out who I was supposed to be there to serve, that's when our results started to double. I mean, we finished number 1 that year. Number 2 that year in 2018. And I continued that rise, and I finished number 1 last year, and developed the number 1 rep in 2018 out of 400 reps, the number 1 rep in 2019, different rep out of the 400. And I finished number 1 out of all 50 offices. And everybody always asks, like, what's the one thing you changed? What's the sales tactic? Like, what's that aha moment that I can plug and play? And it's never what they expect.
Mm-hmm.
It's never something you change in your talk track. It's about who I started to commit myself to become, and just really getting and remembering who I was, and just starting to be vulnerable with my reps, and really going on the relationship side over the results. I started to have a balance rather than my boat just tipped one way.
That's awesome. The tagline on our website, abundantleader.com, is, I believe it's something along the lines of your next level of what it takes to reach your next level of results is not what you think. And it's what you were just sharing really speaks to that, because I think people look at the equation on the surface oftentimes, and they're like, well, this many calls or this many messages, this much outreach, this many appointments per week, with this conversion rate, with this average deal size equals this number.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have to work that equation, right? And you do. It's like you have high standards for activity in your office. But what oftentimes doesn't get talked about is how do you actually not just create standards in an office, but have people buy into them and not just have those standards like crush people, but bring out the best in them. And to do that, it's like you actually have to look at a different equation at a deeper level that potentiates the equation that's on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So the greatest leaders, yeah, of course they care about results. Of course they care about strategy and tactics and standards. But what they care about most is what's the environment that's going to bring out the best in my people. Because if my people are at their best, if they're fully alive, if they're fully engaged, if they love their job, they're going to do a better job, especially in sales. They're going to have much more powerful conversations with prospects. They're going to have much more powerful conversations with each other. And there can be this compounding effect where by asking a better question and focusing on, hey, how might I create the environment in my team, in my culture, in my office that brings out the best in my people?
Totally.
Right? It's just another level. And that's what I hear you speaking to and that you tapped into. And all right, well, I'm at my best when I'm vulnerable, when I feel safe. And when I feel safe and I'm vulnerable, it creates the space for other people to do the same. And when they do that, they feel more connected and trusting, and they then show up more powerfully for each other and for customers. And hey, that's how we unlock another level of results.
Mm-hmm.
So I love what you're describing there. And, every industry is different, company's different in terms of what being number one means.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it's just helpful to speak a little bit to the results of that. And it's, you weren't like focused on the money. I know, because, obviously I was connected to your journey throughout the year.
Yeah.
But in 2018, you made how much?
2018, I made a little over $500,000. It was probably like 550.
Yeah. And then in 2019, when you were number one, how much did you make?
Yeah, I W-2'd over, it was $1,017,000. So, which was something I didn't even think about once. I was just so focused on being present to like who I was there to serve. And it's funny when your focus goes there, those results come, like that cliche. But man, did it come in a very surprising way. I'm like, Linz, I took $1 million. Like, this is crazy. And I wasn't even focused on that. It's like kind of like going back to some of the things that really fire me up is like when you set out your goals, it's not about the goal. I was more focused on who I was becoming.
Yeah.
And then it just followed.
So who did you become? And who are you still becoming? Right? Because it's a journey.
I think that's the never ending journey. I remember looking at some of my values. I've never even thought about, well, what are my life values? What are the things that I hold as what my North Star is when I'm confused? And it's like really boiled down to like when I'm vulnerable, when my heart is open, when I keep my internal promises, those two things that I live from really give me life. And that's who I'm striving to consistently become, is when I feel that fear, that little man inside being like, don't share it. But when I do share that, I've documented literally like on my iPad over 96 conversations. Just in the year of 2019, I have about 40 this year of just conversations where I've almost like cried, or there's been a breakthrough with somebody else, or there's a breakthrough within myself, because and I just look back at that and like, that's the stuff that matters, and those are the things that people will always remember, how they feel, right? Not what you said. And those are the things I really hold to myself as like some of the most important things in life, is that connection, the relationship with people.
So what's interesting in that is you were actually measuring a result in a way there by documenting those conversations. but it wasn't the result of the biggest deals that you or someone on your team closed last year. It was the result of a feeling that you created through that interaction.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say that feeling is? How would you describe that feeling that you unlocked in those conversations where you then said, you know what, I'm going to document this? Because ultimately that's what it is. Like there's a feeling that you had and you're like, oh, this is one of those conversations. I'm going to document it. What's that feeling?
It's a feeling. The best word I could describe is fulfillment. It's a feeling of like my heart is full. Like I just want to give more. Like I'm just overflowing with love and care, and I just want to keep giving more. And I remember listening to this one podcast that I'll never forget, that I've consistently tried to live my leadership by, is like good leaders get people better at their jobs, but great leaders get people better at their lives. And so it makes me think very often, because I see it in my journal literally every day, like, how can I take this transactional conversation and make it transformational? How can I really take this learning lesson and make it something that sticks and really makes them better at their lives? Because all I do within my job, whatever people, learn within the Paycom realm, I'm just trying to tie it to like how this is going to help you in life. One of the questions that one of my coaches at Abundant, I'll never forget, because I've always been deep down a little bit scared to ask this. I'm like, if Paycom wasn't here, like, what do you actually want to do with your life? Like, who do you want to be? Like, what is that vision that you have 5, 10, 20 years out that you want to tell me? Like, because I'm very curious. Because I thought that question would start like, oh, they're going to leave me. I'm going to get them tapped into like their vision. They're going to leave me. When I started doing that with every single one of my people that I serve, creates a completely different dynamic in truly supporting them. I remember, one of my reps said, I want to be a CEO of a company. And he was very average, very mediocre. When he started to tie everything that I did within my job and be like, well, what would the future CEO do? What would that person do? Every single week, one-on-ones, trainings, sales calls, literally became the number one rep. And the only tweak that he made is he started to live from what would that person do? What would that future person? And he started to sell himself, not the product. He just sold himself. People fell in love with him. And it's story after story. I mean, one of my reps this year, I don't think she thought hitting 1 million was possible. But when I really just made the conversation about, well, how are you preparing yourself for the future business owner that you're going to be? Like, why not do that? Why not put everything that we're doing here and tying it to that future success that you're going to inevitably have? Why not use that as your North Star? It changes the game, and it's one question. What would you do if you didn't do this job? What is your dream job? What is that vision that you have for yourself? And saying it with confidence, no matter what the result. So,
yeah, just for anybody who's watching, I think the challenge there for most people is they see what's right in front of them, and they say, well, what's my vision if I'm just looking at what's right in front of me, where I work, my current position, my results last year, right? So they're looking to the future from the position of what's around them in the present and what's happened to them in the past. And then they create a vision, which just looks like goals. It's like incremental growth, like what's a little bit more than this. And what you're suggesting and what, we teach is to lead from possibility, which is to start from the question of, hey, not what's around you or what have you done in the past, but start with what's possible and what would you really love. And once people are clear on that vision, then we can ask, great, how is right where you're at an opportunity to move towards that vision? And when people infuse that sort of meaning and purpose into the work they're currently doing, they engage at a much higher level, right? Like you said, that individual on your team, he sold himself, but he didn't actually just sell himself to his customers. He sold himself on showing up more fully to the position. And what he was selling himself was his own vision. He was selling himself that, hey, if I engage fully and give him my all, take advantage of the opportunity to learn, grow, become a better communicator here, challenge myself, then I'm going to take a step towards that greater vision that I really care about and really inspires me. So he sold himself on why he should show up fully.
Totally.
So the other thing you said that I want to just double tap on, and I think we're getting close to the end here. If there's anything else that you want to share, Aaron, afterwards, feel free. It's kind of some closing comments. But you mentioned that thing you were looking for in those conversations was, like the fulfillment, and ultimately you started to talk about how it's like you just realized you were giving from your heart, right? And you heard once that you don't want to just help people be better at their job, you want to help people be better at their life. And when people are really in their zone of genius, or they're tapping into their abundant leader, as we call it, it's the version of yourself where you're the same. You're the same in your life as you are in sales, as you are with your team. And that's just someone who's committed to living powerfully from their heart. And, that's something that people don't always talk about. And some people are like, what? You're talking about heart and love with sales? Like, how do we get results? It's like, well, sales is connection, baby. If you don't understand that, you're going to have a hard time reaching your full potential as a leader or as a salesperson. And so if we're really talking about connection, like, let's really talk about it. Let's not just like, well, if you want to connect with people, ask this question and blah, blah. No, it's how do you actually create real connection?
Mm-hmm.
And connection does not happen from the head. Connection comes from the heart. And so that's why it's so important as an abundant leader to practice opening your heart, living from your heart. And that's why we say, leave it better than you find it, right? That's a phrase that reminds you, it's like, oh, how can I show up and be here to contribute, to leave it better? That gets you tapped into the heart. Mm-hmm. So I love that you went there and shared that. Again, because sometimes it doesn't come up when talking about performance, but it's not about the performance. It's about just, hey, like that's the way we should live. And that's what feels good. That's what's fulfilling. And it also happens to unlock the highest levels of connection, which does lead to performance too. So, it's a funny little paradox there. So
as you were saying that, I do want to share one thing.
Yeah, go for it.
Living from your heart, especially in this environment, I think one of the things that a lot of stories that I've been helping my people get over is I can't sell as better through Zoom as compared to in person. And one of the aha moments that I've had this last 2 months is that we can. And one story really stands out. It was in this heavy evaluation with this awesome large deal. And one of the key stakeholders, I basically, at the end of the sales call, because we've developed a pretty good relationship over time. One of my new things is my favorite thing is to do is like, hey, I just want to give you an affirmation. I'm like really big on words of affirmation. And I just wanted to share something with you. And I saw her like body language just completely go like stand back. She's like, okay. And I just told her, I'm like, I just want to let you know, whatever happens, whether you choose us or not, one thing that I've really appreciated about you is that you are so self-deprecating, and a balance of assertiveness. And you also have a ton of high level of emotional intelligence. And I truly feel like you speak from the heart, and that's something that not a lot of people in your position do very well. And I remember her sitting back and she started almost crying, and she's like, the fact that you told me that, like, you have no idea how much that meant to me, because I used to vomit on myself before speaking to people, like more than 3, people in a team. I would have to lead these big conferences and I used to throw up before every single one. And she's like, until I started speaking from my heart, that's when everything changed. And I learned to do that through this speaker on watching this TED Talk. And she was telling me about it. And then I paused and I'm like, like as you're talking, you remind me so much of Brene Brown. And she stops and she starts bawling. Mm-hmm. And she's like, it's exactly who the person that changed my life. I'm like, you Brene Brown, girl. And she's like, we just had this crazy bonding moment. And I've been doing that on a lot of my sales calls of just giving people the affirmation. And it can't be inauthentic. It needs to be genuine, right? But I think people are craving that. People crave to be seen, especially in this environment. And it's just another example of like when you're truly like talking and speaking from your heart and not your like sales mind and like, what am I going to say to close this deal and all that stuff, things shift in a big way. And there's also one other thing I wanted to share just because it's been on my heart as of recent. There's a just to talk about the abundant community and just some of the people that exist within this community are the biggest badasses that I've ever been a part of or like been in community with. And it's a place of unconditional acceptance, I would say, that whatever you say, do, it's not judged. And that's something in this day and age that's not very common. But one person that really impacted my life and the practice that I've done literally every morning for 2 years is write thank you cards to people. Gratitude is the antidote to fear. And that's always stuck with me. And when I start my day with writing a thank you card to somebody, and I have literally a list that I, have, as things happen throughout the day, I'll just pull up my phone and be like, oh, I'd love to just let that person be seen. The craziest conversations have happened since doing that 2-3 minute practice. And John Israel, I'll never forget him for sharing that. He wants to raise the level of gratitude by 1% in the world. And those are the people that are within the abundant community, that make you better, that push you, that give you those ideas, that are living from their heart, right, and wanting to be something more in life. And so those are things that I always craved deep down, but I felt like I was on autopilot for many years. And over the last 2 years, I've awoken in a way and remembered like who I was, and who I am to be on this earth. So yeah, just felt like putting that little plug too.
Well, awesome. Thanks for sharing it. There's a little echo, by the way, if you can turn your volume down.
Yeah.
Just to wrap up, it's a really great conversation today. Love everything you shared. And, again, this is about showcasing people who are living it and who are doing it, who are, really making it happen out there in the world and practicing abundant leadership. So it's great to have you share your story, your insights, the work that you've done, the changes you've made, and just how you're showing up in the world. So appreciate it. And I know anybody watching appreciates it too.
Yeah, man. Anytime.